A very good evening to everybody. I'd like to make a very, very, very warm welcome to Karen Eber. Is it Eber or Eber? I apologize if I mispronounced.
That's right. It's Eber. It's like Justin Bieber without the B.
There you go. There you go. So I have a short story to tell. We got introduced through a boothie, and I decided to read the book. I didn't read the book. I listened to the book, but I did it in one sitting. So the whole, well, it was on 1.5 speed, but still one sitting. So Karen has an amazing book. It's called The Perfect Story. And would it be rude, Karen, to ask you to show your eyes?
I am showing them now. I'm not hiding them. It's really hard to see. It's really like, even if I take my glasses off, it's still really hard to see with lighting and stuff. And this is brown and this is green.
Okay. So I'm gonna let Karen tell the story herself, but this is called transchromia, correct?
Heterochromia.
Heterochromia. Thank you. So and Karen talks about this in her book, an absolutely wonderful book. Again, recommend it. By the way, everybody that's here today will get her book for free. So I'm gonna let Karen tell the story about having two different color eyes.
All right. I have two different color eyes, and it's my favorite thing about myself. I feel like I have a built-in answer to that question. Tell me something interesting about yourself, which as a socially awkward introvert is very important to have that answer ready to go. And as much as I love this, I've realized that a lot of people don't know what to make of it. I can tell the exact moment when someone notices, because we'll be talking and their words will start slowing and it comes to a stop, and I know it's coming because I've watched their eyes go back and forth between mine, almost like their brain is trying to decide, do we look at the brown one or the green one? And I brace myself because inevitably they say something like, did you know you have two different color eyes, as if I didn't know. And sometimes they play along and say, no, I had no idea. But really my response doesn't matter, because we are now on this script that seems to happen every time, because the next thing someone says is, I know a dog with two different color eyes, to which I'm always like, thank you. I don't quite know how to respond to that. The next comment is David Bowie. David Bowie had two different color eyes, which he actually didn't. He had an accident and one of his pupils was dilated permanently and they looked different, but they were the same color. But it doesn't matter, because we're now into the interrogation section, which is, what color eyes do your parents have? And my personal favorite, do you see the same colors out of each eye? To which I'm always like, do you? Like, what is that question? And they'll even ask me, do your eyes give you superpowers? And this thing that I loved about myself became this big burden, because now all of these people are being called over and everybody wants to see my eyes, and I'm no longer a person, I'm this thing. And what was a nice interaction now becomes so incredibly awkward. And I felt depleted every time it happened. So I decided, next time this happens, I am going to tell this story. And I told them that I was born with brown eyes. And about the age of 4 or 5, I was in my bedroom coloring one night. And you know how we all had that big box of crayons that we dumped them all into? For me, it was this old cigar box. And I reached into the box and I pulled out a green crayon and I sniffed it, and it didn't really smell like anything, but I took a bite and it had a really interesting texture. So I ate it and I liked it. So I ate another green crayon and another, until all the green crayons in the box were gone. And the next day I woke up and my eye was green. And so I would say the story and then I would be quiet and I would stop. And whoever I told it to, young or old, would look at me like logically struggling, because they know my eyes did not, there's no way my eyes could have changed colors because I ate a crayon. And at the same time, they're a little confused because I said it with such a straight face, and I would let them off the hook. And we would laugh and I would tell them that my eyes are not different colors because I ate crayons. But it always created this shift it created this moment of connection and dialogue and interaction that we never would have had. And some of those people have mentioned that story to me 20 years later. And I realized actually that, you know, my eyes did give me this superpower of being able to use storytelling to create connection in the most artificial of circumstances. And so that is why there's a crayon on the cover of the book. And I did not eat crayons, but it sure makes for a fun story.
This is a wonderful story. It's actually in the first chapter of her book, and I personally just love how her, let's say, challenge in social interactions. I hope that's a okay way to
Yeah.
present. Actually turned into a superpower. And today is really a fireside, so we all can ask any questions we want. I can tell you that I've read a lot of books about storytelling, and Storyworthy is a great one, and I've read many, many more, and I consider myself an amateur storyteller. But when I listened to Karen's book, I was just dumbstruck how good it was and how amazing her stories were. Can I ask you to tell one more story before we move on to the Q&A session? And
Yeah,
I
make me sweat. Go ahead. What are we telling?
so tell the mobile phone story. How about that one?
Story
The
about the elevator shaft.
yep.
Okay, yep. So, if you've seen my TED Talk, you may have seen this story. It's about my friend Maria and how she was walking into work, busy day. Her arms are full of folders. She's got her phone in her hand, and she walks in the elevator and goes to press the button, and her phone just falls right out of her hands. She lunges for it, but misses it as it bounces on the floor, and it just goes straight down that opening between the elevator cart and the floor. And she's dumbstruck and hits her Apple Watch and realizes it's still working 3 stories below. But then she remembers, oh, it's not just my phone. Maria crossed over this magical age where she doesn't just carry a phone, she carries the phone wallet. So it's got her driver's license, her credit card, her badge, and she's realizing her whole life is now at the bottom of the building and she has to figure out what to do. So she goes to the front desk to talk to Ray, the security guard, and he's delighted to see her because she's one of the few people that stops and says hello to him each day. She knows his favorite restaurant and where he took his last vacation and when his birthday is. And it's not because she's nosy or creepy. She just genuinely cares about people and wants them to know that and feel that. And as she approaches him and tells him what happened, his smile disappears and he says, this is going to be really expensive. We've got to call in a service call, shut down all the elevators. Someone has to go down into the shaft to get the phone. Like, it's going to be really expensive. And she said, just get a quote and let's see. So I happen to be walking through the lobby at this moment. I take her to her office, and 10 minutes later, her desk phone rings and it's Ray. And he says, Maria, great news. I was looking at the inspection certificate in the elevator. It's actually due for its annual inspection next month. I can call that in today. We can get your phone back for free. So the same day this happens, I'm reading an article in the New York Times about Walt Benninger, the CEO of Charles Schwab, and he's talking about the last exam he took in university, how he spent weeks studying and walks in with a straight A average business major, expecting to put the punctuation mark at the end of his collegiate career. He gets into the exam room, the professor passes out the papers and has everyone turn it over, and both sides of the paper are blank. They're all looking around confused. And the professor says, I have taught you everything there is to know about business except this one thing, this most important thing. Write down the name of the person that cleans this room. And his heart sank because he had seen her, but he had never spoken to her before and he didn't know her name. He failed the exam. Her name was Dottie, and he made a vow that day to always know the Dotties in his life because he and Maria both really recognized that the importance of a leader is to help people feel seen and valued, regardless of the role they play in the organization. Ironically, people end up on my website all the time because they must search what do I do when I drop my phone down an elevator shaft? And they don't get any answers other than this entertaining story. I always feel bad when I see all these hits for people probably living one of their worst moments. And here they are getting this story from me.
That is hysterical. That is not in the book, by the way. I did not know that part.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'd like to do a thing. Who's feeling brave today? Just put your hand up. Okay, come on up. Come on up. So you don't know what you just volunteered for. So Karin, what's your name?
Tom.
Tom, and you're a Boothie?
Yeah.
Okay, Tom, what do you do for a living?
Mostly retired.
Okay.
87.
This
Was
is
that the secret Boothie handshake just there?
So
I had a question for Karen.
Yeah.
We're also going to put you on the spot. So
Great.
start with your question.
So I actually have two. So the first one,
Let me ask you to do this. Come over here. So unless you want to be in the shadows.
so my first question is, when you're telling stories to develop a culture,
Yeah.
do you have a sense of how frequently you can tell them to individuals? Because you are trying to get them to remember it, and the story is your more effective way to do that. But you can't give them 4 hours of stories in a row. They still will, glaze over. So has it been tested about how often you should tell a story?
So thank you for asking that, Tom. My background before I opened my company and became an author is I spent a 20-year career as a head of culture in General Electric, and one of the businesses, a chief learning officer, head of leadership development. So I was doing exactly that of how am I using stories to persuade or to get momentum. It's not so much a prescription of every number of minutes you can do a story. It is really a couple of things. First is how well constructed is that story so that the people that are experiencing it feel like it's meaningful to them, because that's number one. Stories start with audiences, and if it doesn't feel meaningful to me, I'm going to tune out. The second piece of that is, how is the story demonstrating what is valued in the organization and what needs to happen, and how well constructed is that story? And what I mean by well constructed is it building tension? Is it putting things in it to really engage the brain? Because it's not enough to tell a story. The way you tell one makes a difference in the experience. So let's assume you've got the right audience, you are making sure it's reinforcing what's valued, and you've structured a really good story. You get such a ripple effect from that. You do want to pair it with information, because clearly there's a reason why you're sharing the story. But I find that in shaping culture and leaders and startups and in general settings, it's not that people tell too many stories, it's that they don't tell enough. The movie Lincoln that Steven Spielberg made, there's a wonderful scene in it where he starts to tell a story and everybody kind of moans and they sit back because he apparently told a lot of stories. And I think part of what happens in that moment, in that scene, is he told these very long-winded stories that didn't always feel relevant, and that's when you lose people. But if you are communicating and people feel like it's relevant, you're okay. That could be an everyday thing. It's not the story, it's the meaning that's helpful.
Excellent. And then my second question was, I think you said that as I tell the story, you will experience the emotions that I experienced at the time and am reliving. So I was wondering, do you need to be delivering a story at a similar IQ, or is there a range of IQ? Because I would tell a story differently to a set of Boothies than to a set of third graders, or it would fail. So
Yeah.
do you have any math behind that? And then the second half of that is, what if you have fourth graders to Boothies, all a mix? How do you tell that story that will engage them all?
Yeah, it's less IQ and more audience. So anytime you tell a story, you want to get really clear on your audience. And this is the same thing for communicating. It doesn't have to be a story. So there's 4 questions that you want to spend no more than 5 minutes thinking about that will help you then think about how you build a story to do that. So the first question is, what do I want this audience to feel internally? What is that emotion, that connection that I want them to experience? Second is, what do I want them to do as a result of this story? The third is what is their mindset today and what might be an obstacle. And so if you know you're talking to fourth graders, you can start to think about that age and what do they know and what's important to them and what are you trying to have them take away from that. And you're going to work in specific details that are relevant for that audience. That same story told to adults, the core pieces would be there, but what you want people to take away might be different. So if we look at Walt and Maria, if I was telling that story in an elementary school, the major pieces would be there, but I might want them to take away different things. And I would just adjust it for them and put in things that are familiar to them so that it feels relatable. If I was telling it to security guards, it would be slightly different. So it's less age and more when I think of this group that I'm talking to, how do I think about what I want them to experience and where they are and how I can meet them with that? And it's not a lengthy exercise. That's something you can do with practice in 5 minutes that then you take into how you build your story so that it's most relevant for them.
You're not off the hook. You're not off the hook. Okay. So we're gonna maybe embarrass you a little bit. Maybe you'll come out of this a hero. Either way, we'll have a lot of fun.
Oh, that's good.
Are you ready for this?
I have to be obsessed.
So first of all, we're gonna ask the master, or I don't know what's the female version of master.
Master's fine.
Master's fine. Okay.
Multi-gender.
So we're gonna ask the master for 2 or 3 tips on how to tell the perfect story, and then you're gonna tell us a story using those tips. You ready for this?
Sure.
Okay, I'll do it too. Okay. So I'll embarrass myself as well. So first we're gonna listen, and
So, my wife and I just came back from Costa Rica last month, and it was a meaningful trip for 2 reasons. One, because the last big trip that I took to Costa Rica was we took my mom down for a month after my father had died, because it's a healing place, and she needed to not have to discuss it with all her friends who were coming to give her sympathy. So it gave her some space for that.
Yeah.
But as a consequence to that, it was kind of an emotional thing after that trip. So to a degree, I had neglected a farm I have down there. So I got to go see that neglected farm last month. And so we recently hired some people to fix the things that needed fixing. But it was a reminder of just how you have to use different cultures and relationships to know how to work together. So it was just fascinating to be talking to Eduardo, and now today there's 6 Nicaraguans on there with machetes and stuff like that, and that's just very hard for me to imagine doing, and it's such a typical part of his life. And then the other thing is they now have tractors and bulldozers where they didn't 20 years ago when I bought the farm. So it's a completely different experience. So that trip was a reliving of the good moments of my mom kind of coming through her mourning, and then a reminder as Ruthie that I failed to be responsible, which is not easy for all of us. So it was a journey that had growth involved in it.
Nice.
And Adam's Ari has volunteered to go down and help the guys. So I'm looking forward to getting that ticket tonight.
how far is it from that hot springs that goes through the river?
Oh, very close. You're probably talking about Tabacón. This is it's a mile on Lake Arnall. So you'll have lots of exercise. You'll come back. So muy fuerte. Great. See, the whole internet.
Hey, Tom.
Tienes 13 hijos that will help as well.
Yeah. Hey, Tom, before you sit down, can we build your story just a little bit? Because I want to show how you take something and you continue to iterate it. So we're with you at the farm. Can you describe what we would be seeing? Like, give us what the farm does and what it looks like and what the different colors are. Bring us into that a little bit.
Okay, so Lago Arenal is the largest lake and reservoir in Costa Rica. Generates the hydropower generates 85% of the electricity for the country, so it's very important to them. And it's very undeveloped. So there's probably less than 500 houses where you have a lakefront of 50 miles. So big trees, flocks of parrots, flocks of toucans, jaguars. Yeah. And it's not Colorado where we live. Here, we try to get things to grow. There, you cut things back. So does that give you more of an idea?
Yeah, and see how your story now changes, because now we're starting to see the birds and we're understanding the cutting back. I want you to just do one more version, so same story, right? And I want you to describe what it's like being there and what you feel, and bring us into that with you.
Right. So one of the reasons that this place appealed to me is it kind of has a mystical sense, because at one end of Lake Arenal is the Arenal volcano. So you have a huge, 3,000, 5,000 foot volcano that was active 10 or 20 years ago, right at the edge of the lake. So it dominates all the horizon, and it kind of brings you out of your ordinary life to see something that, reminds you what's going on. So it gives it somewhat of a mystical feel, and that generates the hot water that creates all the hot springs. So it's got microclimates. So on my end of the lake, there's 50 inches of rain a year. At the other end, there could be 200 inches. So you go from, pastures to rainforests. So in an hour drive.
Nice. Yeah. Well, and what we've just done is we just keep peeling back pieces of the story as we start to dig into describing it, as though we're all alongside you, and what it feels like. We get to new parts of the story that are really making the brain pay attention and resonate. So thank you for playing along and bringing us with you.
Okay. Jordan, are you feeling? So I'm gonna throw somebody on the bus here. Jordan, are you feeling up to it? Do you? No. So Jordan is so we started a company. It's called Story Summer. One of the sponsors, along with Techstars and University of Chicago for tonight. So Jordan is our first customer. So I'll let you steer on it. But if you want to try, you're welcome. Who's feeling brave? Wasn't that bad, was it? Look, I'll let you guys think on it. I'll give it a try. It's unfair for me to throw you guys under the bus and ladies under the bus without me giving it a try. So let me see if I can do a good job. And Karin, don't go easy on me. This will work better for these guys than the video. I'm literally sitting in the car, and I'm driving, and I'm going to pick up my kids. I've got 3 of them. One's in the back, driving me nuts. He's 5. He doesn't know how to stop. It's been a long day. I've had a lot of meetings, and I am just completely exhausted. I get up to the drive line. My 2 idiot children I don't know what they're doing, but they're not looking for their dad. It was clearly here to pick them up. So finally they come, they step into the car. I'm like, guys, when I arrive, you look for me. Everybody is waiting behind me. It's the pickup line, you move. And they're like, fine, Dad, whatever. So Liam is 12 and Emma is 10. And I was feeling like shit, but in half of a glance, in half of an eye, while I'm trying to get out of this driving line, I see in the mirror something slightly off. Now, 12-year-olds with all the hormones are broody. Let's just say that. But I see something more than broody. I see something that is fundamentally wrong with my son. And I say, what's wrong? He doesn't answer. 12 years. 12-year-old boys are not great with answering or talking or anything really. But his sister says something. And slowly I figure that he's being bullied. Now, this immediately took back. Now I'm 20 years, 30 years back. I'm being bullied. And I just, as a dad, I want to go and beat the shit out of that child. However, I've evolved into, put those feelings, feel them for a second, put them aside, and I tell him this, Liam, I'm a dude, so I don't listen and ask how you feel. I give solutions. Sorry, like my wife's been working on this for 20 years, not a huge success. So I look at him through the mirror because we're freaking driving home, and I say, Liam, here's what you're going to do tomorrow and every day for the next month, 2 months, as long as it takes. You're going to give him a compliment. At that moment, he starts crying. The thought that giving his bully a compliment just broke the child. That I'm good at, breaking my children. So anyway, I explained it. I explained the compliment needs to be real. I explained it needs to be something that he did. I give him the whole spiel about how to make friends and influence people. And oh, by the way, you get a gift, by the way. Good job. No, not yet. Not yet. Good job, you know what? No, just for them. And that was it. That was it. So months passed, and I forgot about it. Not a great dad. I should have said that at the beginning. And back in the car, picking them up. A few months have passed, and I'm driving. Didn't have a terrible day. It was fine. Pick them up, and look in the mirror, and I see my son. And sometimes I'm a good dad, and this was one of those days. So I'm like, "How was your day?" And he was like, "Hey, oh, I was playing with this guy, blah 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 blah." I see my daughter's face. She has this face full of hatred. I'm like, Emma, what's up? And then Liam answers, right? And I told her boy, he said, oh, she doesn't like him. Okay. Now my daughter is one of the most lovable and loving people on earth, right? She didn't get it from me, I'll tell you that. And I'm like, why doesn't Emma like him? And he's like, well, he wasn't really nice. And I'm like, wait, hold on. What's the boy's name? It was the bully. In a few months, my son had turned a bully into a friend. In retrospect, we now know his sister died of cancer, they're divorced, and he was in incredible pain. And my son was able to take an enemy and turn him into a friend. So my message to you, and the thing that I learned from my son, is it's okay to listen, and it's okay to compliment, it's okay to support, even if the guy or girl or lady is a fucking asshole at that moment. It's okay. So, rip me a new one, Karin.
No, it's great. I like that you started with this day where you're describing how you're feeling frazzled and you're trying to get there and your kids aren't paying attention, right? You're bringing us into your mindset. What is really nice about the story is you do build and release tension of we are trying to understand what's wrong with your son, and now we find out there's the bully, and you want to go beat up the kid, but you tell your son, I want you to compliment him. So that releases tension because it's a little bit unexpected. It's not something we thought you were going to say, and then you come back around again and you do it again when we find out that he's now friends with them, and then you release it with the personal challenges that the bully's having. And so that is good. These are things that are going to make the brain pay attention as you work on the story. Put in some really specific details. How is the bully bullying him? Is there an example that you can share of something he's saying? Or when you're saying, I wanted to go punch the kid, like give us something more specific than that. Like give us an expression that you were thinking or a specific detail. Like, I don't know, the thought that came into my mind isn't a good one. But the specificity as you are building and releasing tension will make the brain pay attention. It's a really solid story. There's good stuff there. At the end, don't announce your takeaway of what I learned here and what I want you to take away. Just go right into it. I learned this from my son and realized we can all blank, blank, blank.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And if that story is somewhat good, it's because of your book. So everybody here will get that for free. Is there anybody brave enough to give it a try?
Or if anyone has questions, that's welcome too. If you want questions about a story you're working on, I love Stump Karen. I'm down for it.
So I'll say something before, and just come up here if you want to ask a question. storytelling, we don't need that, right? What's it for? It doesn't help us in any way or form. It's just to have people have fun at bars. Or can storytelling help us with our jobs and work, family? What else can it do for us?
I think of it as, attention is the most precious thing that people can give us. And we can either talk at people and squander that, or we can communicate in a way that is going to just have ripple effects. So when you are telling a story, as we're listening to Ari talk about this bully, you have another story running in your head of your own experiences, and connecting people to those moments so they have their feeling impacts the way they make decisions. It impacts perspective. It allows for your words to have an even stronger impact. I don't think of it just as you're going to give a presentation, tell a story. It's just a more dynamic way to communicate and honor people's attention. And we know it. That's why we pause when we're scrolling to watch a story or when we flip past it. And the thing that I think is really important, and the whole main idea behind the book, is it's really not enough to tell a story. The way you tell one makes a difference. Like, one of my pet peeves is when people say we are hardwired for story. And yes, there are physical components in our brain that respond to it, but we're no more hardwired for that than we are to run a marathon. Like, you have the same physical components that'll let you run a marathon. But if you don't train, you're going to either not finish or you're going to be in a world of hurt, and it's going to be ugly. And the same is true for storytelling. This idea of we're hardwired for story implies that every story that you hear is good and compelling. And I know I've sat through enough boring meetings to know that's not true. And the same for the holiday table with relatives. And so what I wanted to do is share new science in a really relatable way, excuse me, to demonstrate that there are different choices that you make in terms of what you put into your stories and how you structure them that will cause the person's brain to pay attention and influence their decision making. And so the title The Perfect Story is a little bit of a play on words, because there is no perfect story sitting on a shelf ready for you to pick up and take. It's really how you take your ideas and work them through different considerations to make it be perfect for your audience when you tell them.
I'm going into a meeting with the CFO, CDO, CEO, whatever, VP of this, that, or another. I need to present data to them. Does storytelling have any place in that very professional environment?
Yeah. Whenever I get this question about storytelling and data, if I have a visual, I will put up an ink blot and I will ask everyone what they see. So if I put up an ink blot for you now, and I asked each of you, if I asked 10 of you, there would be 10 different answers, because anytime something like that happens, our brain immediately tries to make sense of it and figure out what it is. So our brain is constantly making these predictions. It actually doesn't respond to stimulus. It is proactively trying to make predictions and assumptions for what things are. And it goes through our long-term memory to see, what have we experienced? What do we know? What's understood that can help us understand what this image is? And when we do this with an ink blot and there are 10 different answers, it illustrates, yeah, we each see different things because we all have different experiences, which is why we all have different understanding. And then I make the point of the same thing happens when you're presenting data. If you put up a chart and you say the data speaks for itself, and you're not taking people through that, you're not giving them the story, you're not grounding them in it, everyone is going to be making different assumptions. So if I put up a simple statistic and had you ask what you think it's about, we'll see that same thing. What stories do with data is it grounds you in the understanding and brings you to the starting line of that same understanding, so you can then have a discussion, you can then debate it, you can then question it. But this idea that data speaks for itself is such a miscommunication, because we are all making different assumptions when you aren't taking people through the story of data. And really, the best way to do that is not to use more and more data. We think more data is credibility and expertise and demonstrating that you've done stuff, but more data is more. really, there's a reason why we're collecting it. There's some question that we're setting out to answer, and it's important to define that up front. But when you're sharing the story of data, connecting people to the smallest amount of data, the smallest version of that story is really helpful before you zoom out. So think of the Red Cross. When there's a natural disaster, they tell you the story of one person or one family who lost their shelter, clothing, electricity, food, water, and you really understand what's happened to their life and how they're struggling to rebuild it. And then they step back and they show you how many people have been impacted in the region, and the weight of it sits differently than if they just started with this big number. And we have emotions about data. We have emotions around all of this. And so when you can tell the smallest story you can about the data and then step back and then tee up a discussion, a question, whatever you're trying to do with the data, it gets you all to the same starting line and in the same room to have the conversation, versus when you just try to jump in discussing it, people question the validity or the reliability, or they start challenging the data because you haven't grounded them in it. So it's such a key thing to help create better understanding and outcomes.
Who is your favorite storyteller and why?
Oof.
Yeah,
So
I am not a fan of favorite questions. I'm like the worst at those because I can't pick one. But I'll tell you what inspires me with storytelling. I am a sucker for story in every part of the world. So if I'm in a movie, I'm looking at how they've built the story and what's interesting and what loses me. I love documentaries. They are such interesting storytelling and how they do it. I love the plays. There's so many choices between the script and the actors and what they're doing. I am a big fan of comedians. Comedians are probably the best storytellers there are because they are constantly building tension and then giving you the zinger. So I don't have any one. I just, I enjoy musicians too. There's like different things in different places, but my favorite thing to do is just to notice the story in the world and what am I responding to and how did they do that and what can I learn from it. I had the chance to do a talk at TED headquarters. So this is before my talk that's on TED.com. When I was in corporate, they were building an app that helps people learn how to tell stories, and they needed beta testers. And as a part of the experience, I was giving them feedback on it, and they invited people to come to their headquarters as a thank you. And 1 week before we got there, I got a call from them where they said, would you like to give a talk on the TED stage? And I'm like, heck yeah, I do. Let's go. So they have a full setup. They have about 200 seats and a red circle and a really intimate stage. And I'm like, I have 1 week to do this. So I am practicing this everywhere. I'm trying to put together the talk, and I'm like at the gym doing the talk and in my car doing the talk. And when I get to New York, I'm in the New York Public Library doing the talk. And the day of, all I can do is count down like, oh my gosh, 2 more hours, I'm going to be on the stage. 1 more hour, I'm going to be on the stage. 30 minutes, I'm going to be on the stage. And my name is called. And of course, all I can think is don't trip. So I very carefully climb up the stairs and I get on the circle and I start my story. And I'm going through and it's going great. We get to the final quarter. I'm like on third base, rounding into home. And my mind just goes completely blank. Now with TED Talks, you don't have notes. There's no teleprompter. Like I see what you see. So I'm just looking at a bunch of faces looking at me. And I don't freak out. I actually remembered in that moment, oh, improv says if you blank, you should look someone in the eye. So my friend was in the second row and I looked her in the eye and nothing. And I'm like, that's all right. I turn over here. I look a stranger in the eye and I'm looking him in the eye. Nothing. And at this point, we're like 10 seconds in. Like, it's not nobody noticed. We're like, oh, this is awkward. And I start looking at the red circle under my feet. And I remember the second rule of improv, which is if you blank, you fall on the floor. And I'm like, I might need to fall on the floor here. Like, nothing is coming to me. And again, I'm not panicked, but I have no way forward. And so I'm just trying to focus and remember where I was and where I'm going. And the audience starts applauding. And in my brain says, oh my gosh, you're getting pity applause. And I'm like, no, I don't want the pity applause. They actually weren't giving me pity applause. TED audiences are super encouraging and they're like, you can do it. It'll be great. That applause was magic because it kicked my brain into motion and I finished the talk. I get off the stage and one of the TED employees came up to me and I'm fighting. Bear with me one moment. Unintentional dramatic pause. So one of the TED employees comes up to me and she says, I really liked your talk. And I was like, yeah, you have to say that, like, thanks so much. And she said, no, you recovered better than most people do. And I thank her and I move on. I'm not paying attention to what she says. And I am pretty crushed. Like, the whole point was to build this idea in front of an audience on the TED stage. And I blanked. I felt awful. I felt like I hadn't done that. And a week later, I'm scrolling LinkedIn and I see this post from someone that was there that day that I had not met. But in the post is a quote from my talk. And I thought, well, I didn't even meet this person, yet here he is a week later remembering an actual quote from my talk. And that struck me. About a month later, I'm back at TED headquarters, helping them on something else. And as a part of that, they give a tour of their offices. And as they're going through, they say, oh, and this is where we do editing. And I'm like, excuse me, what? And they said, yeah, we edit the talks. I'm like, what, they're edited? And they said, yep, sometimes, people blank or they cough or they make mistakes or we have to trim it for a time. Like, yeah, that happens all the time. And I realized, like, I had been telling myself this story that I failed and that I didn't live up to whatever standard when I just completely missed what happened. The audience wouldn't like me because I delivered a perfect talk. They liked me because I was real and I was human and they took stuff from that. Like, I didn't ruin it because I blanked. It made me probably more relatable. And that showed me such a shift in what people are responding to and what they want. Like, yeah, you need to prepare, but they're not looking for perfection. And I then, about a year later, got the invite to do the talk that I did. And it was such a different approach because I was no longer afraid if I blanked or anything like that. What I wanted to do was just be me and have you feel like you got a sense of me on there. And so what started out as a very uncomfortable moment, it ended up being a gift, really, and something that I willingly share. I hope that's the story you wanted. I know we were speaking in code.
No, it is. Okay, so I'm going to, for the public audience that's on the chat, and I'm going to say thank you and goodbye. We're going to go to a closed five-side session for, do you have like 5 to 10 more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to shut down the recording. We're going to do a private session. But before we close the public session, let me just say thank you to our 3 sponsors, University of Chicago, Techstars, and Story Samurai. So thank you very much for your support, and we will be stopping the recording right now.